There's a secret the world rarely speaks of, and it hides in plain sight, in the eyes of a man who walks alone. You've seen him. He moves through the crowd like a ghost who doesn't belong. He isn't lonely, but he is alone. And the longer he remains that way, the stranger his energy becomes. It's not just silence that follows him. It's something deeper, something ancient. Type this in the comments if you've ever felt it too. I'm not lost. I'm becoming. And if you're already feeling the pull of this truth, take a moment, like this video, so more seekers like you can find their way here. They say a man who remains single for too long either becomes broken or becomes dangerous. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if something far more powerful happens? Something no one dares to talk about. You see, in a world obsessed with distractions, swipes, likes, and shallow connections, a man who chooses solitude becomes a threat to everything fake. Because in that silence, he begins to remember. He remembers who he was before the noise, before the expectations, before the world told him what to want. And something incredible happens. This video is not about loneliness. It's not about bitterness or isolation. It's about transformation, a metamorphosis that only begins when a man stops chasing and starts listening to something ancient within himself. You're about to discover why the longer a man walks the path alone, the more he uncovers a rare and almost forgotten power. This isn't theory. This is a pattern that echoes across history, in the lives of mystics, warriors, monks, and Stoics. From the mountains of Tibet to the streets of ancient Rome, men who stepped away from the world were never truly stepping back. They were stepping inward. But this path is not for the faint of heart. It demands stillness in a world that fears silence. It requires the courage to confront demons most run from. And in doing so, it awakens something elemental, something primal, something divine. Stay with me to the end, and you'll understand why the man who chooses solitude does not weaken. He refines. Why he doesn't fade away. He rises. And perhaps you'll start to see yourself not as someone waiting for connection, but as someone being forged, alone, on purpose by design. Because sometimes the longer a man is single, the more he becomes undeniable. Long before modern love stories and dating apps, there existed a different kind of narrative, one not of romance or partnership, but of sacred solitude. In the temples of ancient Greece, in the quiet chambers of Stoic philosophers, and in the deserts where mystics fasted and meditated alone, there lived a truth modern society has buried under layers of noise. That a man alone is not always incomplete. Sometimes he is in preparation. In Stoic philosophy, the man who stands unshaken by external circumstances is the ideal. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and one of history's most powerful men, would often retreat into his own mind, not to escape, but to confront himself. His meditations, written not for the world but for his own soul, reveal a man who ruled an empire, yet understood that the true battlefield is within. But Marcus wasn't the only one. Epictetus, born a slave, found freedom not in ownership or affection, but in mastering his own desires. He taught that true peace comes when we stop seeking validation from others and begin shaping ourselves like a sculptor shapes marble, chiseling away everything unnecessary until only the essential remains. To the Stoics, solitude was never something to be pitied. It was a crucible, a sacred fire. And long before Stoicism, across the Nile, Egyptian priests practiced hekau, word magic, alone in temples hidden from the eyes of the uninitiated. They understood that a man needed to be stripped of distraction to awaken his divine faculties. In India, sages left behind wealth, family, even identity to become sannyasis, renunciants who wandered the forests not to escape society, but to burn away the ego. Throughout all of history, the man who walked alone was often the one who walked deepest. He was the philosopher king, the hermit, the warrior in exile, the monk in the cave. And while society looked on with confusion or fear, the ancients knew the longer he stayed alone, the more dangerous his clarity became. But this truth didn't survive into the modern age untouched. In fact, it was buried, because a man who no longer seeks approval is hard to control. A man who finds peace in his own company is a mirror. He reflects the emptiness others try so hard to ignore. So, the world began to change the story. It told men that to be alone is to be lacking, that to remain single too long is to be incomplete, stunted, immature. But let's ask a deeper question. Who benefits from that lie? Not the man, surely. Not the one who might have become something great if only he had embraced his solitude instead of fearing it. Instead, this ancient wisdom was reshaped, diluted, made palatable, and yet beneath it all, the old truths remain, whispering through time. Solitude is not a punishment, it is a return. The Stoics knew this. That's why Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And what do we waste it on most? Chasing what we're told we need, rather than discovering who we really are. The man who remains single is not unfinished. He is unshackled. He is not idle. He is preparing. Whether consciously or not, he is stepping into a process that is older than empires and deeper than dogma. He is walking the same path as the sages of old. And though the world might not understand it, though even he may doubt it at times, there is power growing in the stillness. In the next part of this journey, we will explore what that power actually looks like. Why solitude does not empty a man, but instead reveals what was always waiting inside. Something subtle begins to shift in a man the longer he walks alone. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. At first it's quiet, a discomfort even. The absence of companionship can feel like a void. But with time, that emptiness reveals itself as something far more potent, a clearing, a sacred space. And in that space, a new presence emerges, his true self. Modern society conditions men to measure their worth by their relationships, by their desirability, by how quickly they can settle down. But the man who delays this script, intentionally or otherwise, enters into a different realm. He begins to see with eyes unclouded by expectation. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when his thoughts no longer revolve around being chosen, liked, wanted. Instead, he begins to observe, to witness. He notices the rituals others follow blindly, the endless cycles of validation, the performance of affection, the fear of being alone. And in contrast, his silence starts to take on weight. He no longer needs to be seen because he sees himself. The longer a man is single, the more the masks fall away. The social mask, the romantic mask, the mask of performance. What's left? Rawness, simplicity, awareness. He becomes acquainted with the rhythms of his own being. When he's most creative, what truly stirs his soul, what drains him, what energizes him. He begins to honor those rhythms, not because someone else told him to, but because he listened. And here is the paradox. While most see solitude as a space of lack, the man who walks through it discovers abundance. Not in possessions or praise, but in self-possession. He begins to master what the Stoics called autarkeia, self-sufficiency of the soul. Think of the ocean. On the surface, storms rage, but dive deep enough, and everything becomes still. A man in solitude begins to live from that depth. He stops reacting. He begins responding, or sometimes simply being. This is where the transformation begins. He becomes more discerning. The company he once craved now feels noisy unless it's truly aligned. The conversations he once tolerated now feel hollow unless they resonate with truth. He no longer reaches for relationships to fill time. He cultivates relationships that amplify time. A man who's been alone long enough knows the sacredness of his own energy. He moves differently, speaks less, but with more weight. He's no longer in a rush to impress, to persuade, to chase. His presence becomes magnetic, not because he's trying to attract, but because he's anchored, deep, still, unmoved. This is where the world begins to notice and misunderstand. People will call him distant, cold, arrogant. But what they're really feeling is unfamiliarity. They don't know how to engage with someone who does not crave approval, someone who does not fear silence, someone who no longer orbits their expectations. In truth, the longer a man is single, the more he becomes a mirror. And mirrors are uncomfortable because they reflect not just beauty, but distortion, not just light, but shadow. And this, too, is part of the power. Solitude turns a man inward, but eventually it turns him outward with a new kind of vision. He begins to see through people, their wounds, their longing, their projections. And because he knows his own, he no longer judges. He understands. He develops what ancient traditions called sophrosin, a balanced mind, a quiet mind, a mind rooted in virtue and clarity. And here's what most don't expect. The longer he is alone, the more he becomes capable of deep, authentic love. Not because he's desperate to find it, but because he's learned not to lose himself within it. He doesn't enter relationships for completion. He enters from wholeness. He is no longer a man who needs to love. He is a man who chooses to love wisely, fiercely, and without illusion. This is the mystery most overlook, that solitude doesn't harden a man. It refines him. It doesn't strip him of love. It purifies it. And in this purification, he becomes not a lesser version of himself, but the man he was always meant to be. At first, solitude feels like distance from the world, from affection, from intimacy. But in time, the man begins to understand. He was never truly disconnected. He was just tangled in things that were never real. The longer he remains single, the more illusion peels away. He begins to see the architecture of his desires. How much of what he once wanted was programmed, not chosen. Was it truly his longing to find someone? Or was it the echo of voices, parents, peers, movies, society, telling him that without someone beside him, he is incomplete? He begins to ask, what if I was never broken? What if I was simply buried? This is where the journey begins to feel mystical. Because as distractions fall away, something ancient stirs beneath the surface. The man becomes a vessel for deeper knowing. Call it intuition. Call it spiritual awakening. The Stoics called it demon, the guiding spirit within. And the longer he remains alone, the louder it speaks. This inner voice does not shout. It whispers in stillness. It doesn't offer dopamine hits or instant gratification. It offers truth. Uncomfortable, sobering, but liberating. He begins to realize that most of his suffering came not from being alone, but from resisting it, from fighting the silence rather than learning to listen. And once he stops fighting, The silence becomes a friend, a teacher, a gateway. He steps into a kind of power that others can feel but can't name. The power of a man who no longer trades authenticity for acceptance, who no longer sells his soul for company, who walks through the world not seeking warmth, but radiating it. This man cannot be manipulated with praise nor destroyed with rejection, because he is no longer held together by external forces. He is held together by his own inner gravity. There is a moment, a precise shift, where solitude becomes sovereignty. He stops apologizing for the space he takes up. He stops shrinking in order to fit into someone else's idea of love. He stops waiting for permission to become whole. And what emerges is something society has nearly forgotten: the integrated man. This man, forged in silence, refined in solitude, becomes dangerous to the systems that thrive on insecurity. He does not consume for validation. He does not chase for ego. He is not easily swayed by false urgency or emotional manipulation. He is calm. That calmness, ataraxia as the Stoics called it, is not the absence of emotion. It's the transcendence of emotional chaos. It's not numbness, it's clarity. He sees love not as a transaction, but as a sacred exchange. He no longer begs for it, he embodies it, which is why people begin to orbit him, like moths to a flame. But he does not burn for just anyone. He has learned the difference between being needed and being seen, between attraction and alignment, between chemistry and connection. And so, when he does choose to open his heart, he does it from strength, not scarcity. The man who remains single long enough becomes immune to shallow pursuits. He can no longer tolerate half-heartedness, the empty flirtation, the performative relationships, the noise. He seeks depth or nothing. But here's what most will never understand. This isn't loneliness turned bitter. This is solitude made sacred. It's what the mystics sought in the mountains, what the sages tasted in silence, what the Stoics cultivated in stillness. This man does not just abstain from the world. He digests it, filters it, refines it, and what remains is essence, purity, purpose. And so, he becomes dangerous. Dangerous not because he wishes harm, but because he cannot be owned. Dangerous not because he is closed, but because he opens only for the worthy. Dangerous not because he is heartless, but because his heart is no longer cheap. He has become rare, and in this rarity lies the secret so few men discover. That solitude was never the absence of love. It was the preparation for it. Now that we've walked through the sacred corridors of solitude, it's time to descend from the mountain and return to the world with something to carry. Because this journey isn't just a beautiful idea. It's a way of being, a way of living, day by day, in alignment with that deep, unshakable center you've begun to feel stirring within you. But how do you live this path in the modern world? How do you hold on to the silence when the noise is constant? How do you remain rooted when everything around you pulls you to drift? You begin with ritual, not the kind wrapped in dogma or superstition, but personal rituals, simple, intentional acts that become anchors. Start your mornings in silence. Before the phone, before the world demands your attention, sit with yourself. 5 minutes, 10. Breathe, listen. Ask yourself not what you have to do, but what truly matters today. This one practice alone will begin to change the way your mind operates. The Stoics would call this premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of life's challenges. But here, in the context of solitude, you are not rehearsing tragedy. You are rehearsing sovereignty. right, not for productivity, not to be profound, simply to clear the fog, to reveal yourself to yourself. Keep a journal, not as a record of what happened, but as a map of who you're becoming, one entry each night. What did I discover about myself today? It may sound small, but over time, these reflections become a compass. They guide you away from distraction and back toward essence. Next, master your environment. Look around your living space. Is it cluttered with noise? With reminders of who you used to be, or worse, who the world told you to become? Strip it down, not to sterile minimalism, but to intentionality. Let your space reflect your inner world. Choose stillness over stimulation. Choose order over chaos. Not because it looks good on Instagram, but because it aligns with your soul. Then begin to protect your energy as if it were sacred currency, because it is. Start noticing who drains you and who nourishes you. And here's the hardest part. Act on that noticing. Distance from those who consume your peace without giving anything back. You're not judging, you're preserving. Not all solitude is physical. Some of the deepest loneliness comes from being surrounded by people who don't see you. Solitude is choosing presence over pretense. Next, learn to sit with desire without immediately feeding it. This is not suppression. It is transmutation. When the craving arises, whether for affection, attention, distraction, don't numb it. Observe it. Hold it in your hands like a flame. Ask, what is this really asking for? Often beneath the surface of our compulsions lies a deeper hunger for purpose, for truth, for self-recognition. Solitude teaches you to feed those deeper hungers first. And what about love? The world will tell you to seek it, to chase it. But the man on this path knows better. He becomes it. Practice showing up in your relationships not to complete anyone or be completed, but to offer your fullness. Let your solitude overflow into your connections, not as isolation, but as depth. When you speak, speak from stillness. When you listen, listen from presence. Don't perform, don't chase, just be. Ironically, the less you need love, the more purely you can give it. And for those moments when loneliness does creep in, and it will, don't run from it. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants to teach you. Often what we call loneliness is not the absence of others. It's the absence of ourselves. It's the soul knocking on the door, asking to be let back in. Let it. Finally, hold this truth close. The path of sacred solitude is not linear. There'll be days you feel powerful and clear, and there'll be days you feel lost, even tempted to abandon it all for a taste of shallow comfort. That's okay. Return. Again and again. Not because you have to, but because something within you remembers. This is the way. You are not missing out. You are tuning in. You are not falling behind. You are stepping outside the illusion of time. You are not alone. You are with the only person who will walk with you from your first breath to your last, yourself. So honor him, study him, build him, and from that sacred ground, let everything else flow. So now we arrive at the edge, the place where wisdom must leap from thought into embodiment. You've walked through the sacred silence of solitude, heard the whispers of the ancient within you, and glimpsed what the world rarely shows. That being alone is not a curse, it's a crucible. Let this truth settle into your bones. The longer a man is single, not aimlessly drifting, but consciously walking alone, the more he remembers who he truly is, not as defined by his relationship status, not as measured by affection or attention, but as a sovereign being, capable of immense love precisely because he no longer needs to be consumed by it. This is not about swearing off intimacy. This is not the cold retreat of the bitter. This is the warm, smoldering power of the awakened. Because here's the secret. Love given from fullness is unlike anything the world can touch. And the man who has stood alone long enough to become whole, he is not waiting for love to rescue him. He is waiting to recognize someone who has done the same. And in that meeting, there is no clinging, no grasping, no pretending. There is only presence, depth, peace. The Stoics taught us that the only true freedom lies in mastering the self, in not being a slave to impulse or fear or longing. They didn't ask us to turn away from life. They asked us to meet it with stillness. And that is what you now carry. Stillness as strength, solitude as sacred, love not as salvation, but as expression. Let the world rush. Let it scream and scramble. You walk slowly. Let others chase validation. You hold your worth in silence. Let them call you mysterious, stoic, even strange, because what they sense is power. Not loud, boastful power, but the ancient, steady kind, the kind that moves mountains not by force but by patience. So if you're a man who finds himself single, embrace it not as a punishment, but as a path, a forge, a mirror, a calling. This is your time to rebuild, to unlearn, to remember. And when the world asks, why are you still single? Smile gently, because the truth is, you're not still single. You're finally free. And if these words have stirred something within you, if you felt seen, felt understood, felt called, then take a moment right now. Let others know in the comments, I choose solitude as my strength. And if you haven't already, like this video, not just for me, but for you, as a small act of claiming your path, of saying, yes, this message is mine. This journey isn't over. In fact, it's only beginning. There are deeper layers of wisdom waiting, ancient truths yet to be unearthed, and countless moments where your presence will shift the very room you walk into. Stay curious, stay grounded, stay powerful in your stillness. And when the world forgets, return here. I'll be waiting. Until then, walk your path with grace, brother, and never forget, you are not alone in your solitude. You are surrounded by those who are quietly doing the same.